February 7, 2001. Dale Evans lay in her bed at the age of 88, surrounded by her children. They were singing hymns, the kind she'd sung thousands of times over her 8 decades of life. Her voice, once powerful enough to fill arenas, had grown weak, but she was at peace, ready to leave a world that had given her fame, love, and more heartbreak than most people could bear. In her final years, she'd begun speaking truths that shocked everyone who thought they knew her. The Queen of the West, America's beloved cowgirl, wasn't who the world had believed her to be. For 50 years, she'd carried secrets that would have destroyed her career if they'd come out earlier. Lies forced upon her by Hollywood studios. A marriage that looked perfect but was marked by loneliness and strain. And the devastating losses of children whose deaths nearly shattered her faith completely. This is the story of Dale Evans, the woman behind the rhinestones and the smile. Before she became Dale Evans, she was Frances Octavia Smith, born on October 31, 1912, in Uvalde, Texas. Her childhood was anything but glamorous. Raised partly by her uncle in Arkansas after her parents' unstable relationship fractured, Frances grew up fast, too fast. At 14 years old, she eloped with a boy named Thomas F. Fox. By 15, she was a mother to a son she named Tommy. By 16, she was divorced and abandoned in Memphis, Tennessee, with a baby to feed and no money. It was 1928, and the world had no sympathy for teenage single mothers. Frances took whatever work she could find, eventually discovering she had a talent for music. She sang and played piano at local radio stations, scraping together just enough to survive. But no matter how talented she was, the stigma of being a divorced teenage mother followed her everywhere. In 1929, desperate for stability, she married again. This time to a man named August Wayne Johns. That marriage lasted until 1935, childless and unfulfilling. By 1937, she'd married for a third time, to pianist and arranger Robert Dale Butts. They collaborated musically, but the relationship was cold, more professional than romantic. It would end in divorce in 1946, 3 marriages before she turned 35. 3 attempts at building a life that kept falling apart. But through it all, Frances kept singing. In 1931, a radio station manager in Louisville told her that Frances Octavia Smith wasn't a name that would sell. He suggested something catchier, something that would stick in people's minds. Dale Evans. She adopted the name, and Frances Octavia Smith disappeared forever. By the mid-1930s, Dale had clawed her way to a contract with 20th Century Fox, earning $400 a week. It should have been a dream come true, but the studio executives had a condition. Her son Tommy, now a young teenager, couldn't be acknowledged as her son. The wholesome image they were building for her couldn't include a child born out of wedlock to a teenage mother, so they forced her to lie. Tommy became her younger brother in every interview, every publicity photo, every public appearance. And Tommy, loving his mother and wanting her to succeed, went along with it. For over a decade, Dale lived with that lie. She smiled for cameras, sang on radio shows, and played the role of the carefree rising star, all while pretending her own child didn't exist. The guilt ate at her. Years later, she would confess that the deception haunted her more than any other mistake she'd made. It was a burden she carried in silence, one that shaped every relationship she had for the rest of her life. In 1944, Dale was cast in a film called The Cowboy and the Señorita, opposite a man named Roy Rogers. She didn't want the role. She'd been trying to build a career in musicals, not westerns. She couldn't even ride a horse and had to learn on set, terrified she'd fall and humiliate herself. But the moment she and Roy appeared on screen together, something clicked. The chemistry was undeniable. Audiences loved them, studios wanted more. And behind the scenes, a real connection was forming. Both of them were married to other people at the time, so nothing happened immediately. But in 1945, Dale divorced Robert Butts. Then, in 1946, tragedy struck Roy's life. His wife Arlene died suddenly, just 1 week after giving birth to their son Dusty. An embolism took her without warning, leaving Roy devastated and alone with 3 young children to raise. Dale, who understood heartbreak better than most, became his friend during that dark time. She helped him navigate his grief, and slowly, their friendship deepened into something more. In 1947, Roy proposed to Dale in the most unconventional way imaginable. They were at a rodeo in Chicago, and Roy was sitting on his famous horse Trigger, about to ride into the arena. He looked down at Dale and asked her to marry him. Before she could even answer, he spurred Trigger forward and rode off into the spotlight. On December 31, 1947, they married at the Flying L Ranch in Oklahoma while filming a movie. It was her fourth marriage and his third. But this one, unlike all the others, would last. More importantly, it finally freed Dale from the lie she'd been forced to live. For the first time, she could publicly acknowledge Tommy as her son. The studio couldn't control her anymore. The relief was overwhelming, but the damage had already been done. Years of pretending had taken their toll, and the guilt would never fully leave her. Roy and Dale quickly became Hollywood's king and queen of the West. They blended their families, with Roy bringing his 3 children and Dale finally able to claim Tommy openly. In 1950, they welcomed their first and only biological child together, a daughter they named Robin Elizabeth. But from the moment she was born, they knew something was wrong. Robin had Down syndrome and serious health complications. In 1950, doctors routinely advised parents to institutionalize children with disabilities, to hide them away so they wouldn't be a burden or an embarrassment. The studio executives were horrified, fearing that fans would be repulsed if they knew. They urged Roy and Dale to keep Robin hidden, to never speak of her publicly. Roy and Dale refused. They defied every expectation, insisting that Robin appear in family photos, bringing her to events, and loving her openly. For 2 precious years, they cared for their delicate little flower with a devotion that shocked Hollywood. Then, just before Robin's 2nd birthday in 1952, she died from complications related to her condition. The grief nearly destroyed Dale. She later admitted that her faith, which had always been her anchor, felt shaken to its core. She questioned why God would give her a child only to take her away so soon. But eventually, she found a way to transform that pain into something meaningful. In 1953, she published a book called Angel Unaware, written as if it were Robin's message from heaven. Every penny she earned from the book was donated to the National Association for Retarded Children. The book shocked Hollywood, where disabilities were still taboo, but it touched millions of parents across the country who had faced similar struggles. Families who had been told to hide their children suddenly felt seen. People began bringing their kids with Down syndrome to Roy and Dale's rodeos, thanking them for giving them hope. In Oklahoma, the County Council for Mentally Challenged Children renamed their center in Dale's honor. Robin's short life had changed the way America saw children with disabilities, and Dale had used her platform to make it happen. But the losses didn't stop with Robin. Roy and Dale adopted several more children over the years, building a large blended family. They adopted Mimi from Scotland, though legal restrictions prevented a formal adoption. They adopted Dodie, a 7-month-old Choctaw baby, a heritage Roy connected with as he was part Choctaw himself. They adopted Sandy and Debbie, filling their home with love and chaos. Then, in 1964, tragedy struck again. 12-year-old Debbie was killed in a horrific church bus accident. The loss was sudden, senseless, and unbearable. Dale later said it was one of the darkest moments of her life, reopening wounds from Robin's death that had never fully healed. She wrote a book called Dearest Debbie, pouring her grief onto the page in an attempt to process the pain. The family moved from their Chatsworth Ranch, where too many painful memories lingered, to Apple Valley, California, hoping a fresh start would ease the anguish. But the grief followed them, and then in 1965, their adopted son Sandy died in an accident while serving in the peacetime army in Germany. Dale wrote another book, Salute to Sandy, grieving yet another child lost too soon. By the 1950s and 60s, Roy and Dale were at the height of their fame. Their television show, The Roy Rogers Show, ran from 1951 to 1957 and made them household names. They sang Happy Trails at the end of every episode, a song Dale had written that became an American anthem. They performed in rodeos, made movies, recorded albums, and appeared on countless magazine covers. To the public, they were the perfect couple, the king and queen of the West, living a life of adventure and faith. But behind the scenes, the reality was more complicated. Roy was a strict disciplinarian, particularly with the children, and Dale often felt caught between her husband and her kids. When Roy was away filming or touring, which was often, Dale felt isolated and alone. She later confessed that there were long stretches of loneliness that no amount of applause could fill. Their marriage, while lasting, was not the fairy tale it appeared to be. It was marked by strain, by unspoken tensions, and by the weight of carrying a public image that didn't match the private reality. Dale also became increasingly outspoken about her faith and her political beliefs. In 1964, she addressed a Project Prayer rally at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles, calling for the return of mandatory school prayer in public schools. She declared it was high time all America stood up to be counted, aligning herself firmly with conservative causes. She campaigned for presidential candidate Barry Goldwater and appeared at Billy Graham crusades across the country. Her convictions were woven into every aspect of her career. She wrote 28 inspirational books, composed over 200 songs, and used her platform to promote Christianity at every opportunity. Critics accused her of being too political, too preachy. Dale didn't care. Her faith was the foundation of her identity, and she refused to compromise it for anyone. By the 1990s, Roy and Dale were no longer making new movies or television shows, but they remained beloved cultural icons. They appeared on nostalgia programs, introducing their old films and sharing stories from Hollywood's golden age. In 1996, Dale even hosted her own religious program called A Date with Dale on the Trinity Broadcast Network. But time was catching up with them. Roy's health began to fail, and on July 6, 1998, he died at the age of 86. Dale lost her partner of 51 years, the man who had defined so much of her life. She was no longer part of the legendary duo. She was just a widow, facing her final years alone. In those last years, Dale became more reflective and more brutally honest about her life. She spoke openly about the loneliness she'd felt in her marriage, the strain of Roy's strict parenting, and the lingering regret over the lie she'd been forced to tell about Tommy. She admitted that pretending her son was her brother had eaten away at her sense of authenticity, creating a wound that never fully healed. She wanted to be remembered not for her rhinestone cowgirl outfits or her cheerful on-screen persona, but for her willingness to speak truthfully about suffering. Her daughter Dodie later said that Dale wasn't afraid to reveal the truth, that she believed sharing both the good and the bad is what makes a person whole. Dale Evans died on February 7, 2001, just 3 years after Roy. Her children said her final moments were peaceful, and that she expressed her readiness to reunite with Roy and the children she'd lost. She was 88 years old, and she'd lived a life that was equal parts triumph and tragedy. Roy and Dale left behind a legacy that's impossible to summarize neatly. They were the king and queen of the West, beloved by millions, and enshrined in American pop culture. But they were also people who carried burdens most of us will never understand. Dale buried 2 children and adopted several more, only to lose another 2 in devastating accidents. She endured 3 failed marriages before finding one that lasted. Though it was far from perfect, she was forced to lie about her own son for over a decade, carrying guilt that haunted her for the rest of her life. And yet, through all of it, she found ways to turn her pain into purpose. She changed how America saw children with disabilities. She wrote books that comforted grieving parents. She used her platform to advocate for faith and compassion, even when it made her unpopular. In 2025, decades after her death, Happy Trails was inducted into the National Recording Registry, ensuring that her voice and her message will endure for generations. The question that lingers is whether Dale should have revealed the truth about her life sooner. Would it have helped others to know that the Queen of the West struggled with loneliness, grief, and regret? Or was waiting until the end the only way she could protect the image that had given her a platform to do good? There's no easy answer. What's clear is that Dale Evans was far more complicated than the character she played on screen. She was a woman who survived heartbreak, who rebuilt her life over and over, and who ultimately chose honesty over the myth Hollywood had created for her. Her final confessions didn't diminish her legacy. If anything, they made it more powerful, proving that even icons are human, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, even if it takes 50 years.